I want to thank Zoe and the staff here at the North Carolina Room. Back in 1990, when I was approached by the Grove Park Inn and asked if I'd be interested in writing a history of the hotel, I started what became a 27-year journey here at Pack Library, because I was learning how to spool microfilm into the reader so I could start reading Asheville newspapers going back to 1913 and earlier. And I suspect that everyone who has written anything about the history of Asheville has relied on the North Carolina collection. And so I hope you will show your appreciation today by becoming a member of the Friends of the North Carolina Room. With all the uncertainty swirling around the county budget, the North Carolina Room needs our support more than ever before. For it would be easy for a county commissioner who's never been here, never stepped inside the North Carolina Room, never bothered to look at what we've got there in the files, or even to enjoy the exhibits that the staff puts together or to attend one of these seminars, could easily decide to slash their meager budget. So please become a member today. And also, as Terry pointed out, my paperback book, Tales of the Grove Park Inn, normally sells for $20. It's selling for $15 today, and all the proceeds are going to the Friends of the North Carolina Room. So in any way you can, please support it. Now, on to the good stuff. My story today is about a family feud that began as a love triangle and involves all the passion that fuel a Shakespearean drama: jealousy, greed, pride, and hatred. Now, the Grove fortune did not start with the Grove Park Inn. Instead, as an ironic twist, as the building of the Grove Park Inn in 1913 and the running of it from 1913 to 1928 actually signaled the end of the Grove fortune. It had been estimated to be as high as $10 million in 1927 when E.W. Grove died, under mysterious circumstances, I might add, in his penthouse suite atop the Battery Park Hotel just 1 block from here. But it all began with a bottle of rather ordinary ingredients intended to ward off malaria and a skillful marketing campaign built around the bizarre body of a pig with the head of a baby and a dubious guarantee: no cure, no pay. But since no cure generally meant that the patient died of malaria, collecting the 50 cents, half a day's wages, from E.W. Grove might have proved difficult. The Grove Park Inn has as many stories as it does rooms, but today's story involves a small cast of characters. Here in the front seat of the car is one of our main characters, that being Fred Loring Seeley. Beside him, if you know your American history, and especially that of failed presidential candidates, you'll recognize William Jennings Bryan, who at that time, this particular day, was Secretary of State of the United States under Woodrow Wilson. Directly behind him is Mrs. William Jennings Bryan, who looked like she would much rather have been at the Asheville Mall than taking this trip around the 1,200 acres that E.W. Grove owned. In the middle, in the back seat, is the heroine of our story, Evelyn Grove Seeley, with her stylish hat of the day. I guess the fireman's plume was in that year. Then on the right-hand side, your right-hand side, a woman I've not yet identified, but she obviously belonged to the North Carolina Beekeepers Association. There was no mosquito going to get into her bodice that day. The other character, this is a young picture of E.W. Grove, Edwin Wiley Grove. We don't have a lot of pictures of him, and this is the closest he ever came to smiling any time in his life. He was born on a small farm not far from Memphis in 1850. His father went off to fight for the Confederacy, and he and his mother ran the family farm until he returned. Now, after the war, E.W. Grove is believed to have attended pharmacy school in Memphis. He was always a little evasive about his level of education, and he let it be known that he didn't mind being called Dr. Grove, even though I doubt if he ever came anywhere close to that. But He took a job in a small town of Paris, Tennessee, located, I guess everything in Tennessee would be east of Memphis, where he married Mary Louisa Moore, the love of his life. And together they had 2 children in Paris, Tennessee. But at this time, the #1 cause of death in the South was malaria. This was before they had figured out that malaria was carried by mosquitoes. Mosquitoes lived in swamps. And so it was that the South, especially young children and the elderly in the South, were susceptible to dying from malaria. And E.W. Grove was not immune from tragedy. She was only 34 years old when Mary Louisa Grove died of malaria, along with one of their 2 daughters, Irma. So E.W. Grove, as a young man, was left to care for his daughter, Evelyn, there in Paris, Tennessee. Grove might have remained a small-town pharmacist had it not been for the death of his wife and infant daughter. But it set him on a mission. He wanted to discover a cure, and lack thereof, a preventative for malaria. Now, Grove was not a doctor, so the odds of him finding a cure of malaria were pretty remote. But he was able to develop an effective preventative called Grove's Tasteless Chill Tonic. Now, at the time, the tribes in South America knew that if they chewed on the bark of the chicona tree, they could ward off malaria. And the scrapings of the bark of the chicona tree were turned into quinine. And quinine, if taken, was determined to be an effective way to prevent you from getting malaria. But if you know anything about quinine, what do you know about it? Bitter. Very bitter, extremely bitter. So even though quinine existed, getting people to take it was the problem. And it remained then for E.W. Grove to come up with a way to take an ordinary ingredient, that being quinine, and make it palatable. And so he experimented with it for a couple of years. He added 30% lemon syrup, along with some other ingredients. But it was not until he came up with the last ingredient that E.W. Grove's Tasteless Chill Tonic really became a bestseller. And that was when he started making it 20% alcohol. No wonder the kids loved taking it. And ironically, E.W. Grove himself was a teetotaler. And in the early years of the Grove Park Inn, alcohol could not be served there. But he certainly could sell it. At 50 cents a bottle, half a day's wages, it was not cheap. And the wonderful thing about it, from Grove's perspective, was that under his instructions, you had to take approximately 3 tablespoons a day during the entire malaria season, which in the South means anytime there's not mosquitoes flying around. So he's selling this stuff about 10 months out of the year and becoming very rich in the process. So at this time, he goes to Detroit, 1898, one of our dates here. 1898, he goes to Detroit. He's trying to figure out a way to make his syrup into a tablet. And so he's up there working at a small company called Park Davis. They had 18 employees. One of them being this young man, Frederick Loring Seeley, also a pharmacist, this one from New Jersey. And the 2 men meet in Detroit in the spring of 1898. At this time, 1898, if you do your math, E.W. Grove is 48 years old. Fred Seeley, but young enough to be his son. And in effect, he, in a sense, becomes E.W. Grove's son. And the 2 of the men, I think, pretty much sized each other up and decided that they could work together. And so E.W. Grove, I think, he really sets things in motion because he convinces Fred Seeley to come to Asheville, where E.W. Grove had a summer home. By this time, he had moved from Paris, Tennessee to St. Louis to have a larger factory. And introduces him to Evelyn, his only daughter. And I know Grove did it on purpose. I know that they're both about the same age. They were both single. So Grove and Seeley meet in March, April. Fred Seeley comes to Asheville in June, stays for about a week. And in September, he and Evelyn are married. And off things start. So, E.W. Grove, at this time, like I said, had moved to St. Louis, and he'd remarried. And so this brings in another character in our cast. The woman on your left, his right, is his second wife, Gertrude. He met Gertrude in Paris, Tennessee. They were married, and this particular picture was taken in St. Petersburg, where they had a home. And how they squeezed the two of them into this carpet, I'm not quite sure. And once again, you can see he has his characteristic smile on. Actually, what brought E.W. Grove to Asheville was a severe case of the hiccups. He had hiccups seasonally. They would last for hours and hours, sometimes days at a time. And the doctors in St. Louis recommended, I'm sure just to get him out of their office, that he go to Asheville. Because Asheville at this time was becoming known as a place where you could come and recuperate, as we all know. And we have our last main character, the guy on the right. This is the only son of Gertrude and E.W. Grove. He's named after his father, so we'll just call him Eddie to keep him straight. This is Eddie's child between he and his father. Take a look at the body language of that small child and tell me what he thinks of his father. This was one of Eddie's, I almost called him E.W. This was one of Eddie's legitimate children. He sprinkled a few others along the way as well. And he will play a major role in our story at the end here. So, as he grew older, he became a rebellious teenager. And so E.W. Grove said, well, Fred can solve any problem. At this time, Fred is basically running the Paris Medicine Company. So he sends Eddie to Asheville to live, actually to Atlanta at that time. Fred and Evelyn lived in Atlanta for a few years. And he sent Eddie to live with Fred so that Fred could straighten him out. And Fred Seeley was a very strict disciplinarian, whether it was with his 5 children or any of his employees. And so he, took it upon himself that he was going to straighten out Eddie. Well, all he did was to form a bitter hatred of Fred by Eddie. Hated him. And could only wait for his chance to get his revenge on Fred Seeley. Now, back in Asheville, at this time, Grove, I told you Grove had built a second home here. He ended up homes in 3 places, St. Petersburg, St. Louis, and Asheville. And he would come here in the summers. Well, this, as you know, is not his house. His house has been torn down. This is the original Battery Park Hotel, which had been built, right around 1880. Now, at this time, the turn of the century, shortly thereafter, the city fathers of Asheville were struggling with their identity. Should Asheville be known for tourism, as some wanted, tobacco, as some thought could happen, or tuberculosis? Because Asheville was a place where boarding houses were springing up and sanitariums, some official, some licensed, some not so, to treat people for tuberculosis. That, of course, would be worthy of a seminar of its own, so I'll leave it alone at that, only to say the progressives won out. E.W. Grove being one of them, convinced that Asheville's future lay in tourism, not tuberculosis, and in fact, to the extent that E.W. Grove bought up wooden boarding houses around town and tore them down, because he was convinced that if Asheville became synonymous with tuberculosis, tourists wouldn't come. So he took it to that extreme, where he literally put his money where his mouth was. And so the town fathers came to him to convince him that Asheville needed a modern hotel, built on Sunset Mountain. And Grove, when he came to town, started investing in land. He owned approximately 1,100 acres of North Asheville on his debt. But what he didn't own, and we'll show it in a little bit, is the Asheville Country Club's golf course, located directly in front of the Grove Park Inn. When you look at the map of Grove's holdings, there's this island in the middle, which was the Asheville Country Club golf course, because the people who started it, primarily the Cox family, which owned the Battery Park Hotel, had every bit as much money as E.W. Grove. So the guy from St. Louis wasn't going to come in and just buy it from them. But again, another seminar. But Grove was a little bit hesitant. He didn't know anything about the hotel business. But he had this contest among architects. And among the many architects who failed to meet his standards were Richard Sharp Smith and Douglas Ellington. He had pretty high standards. But basically, I don't think he really wanted to do it. And so lo and behold, one day he's complaining to Fred Seeley. The two are getting along great at this time. And Fred Seeley packs up all the plans, takes them home with him, comes back on Monday morning with this sketch and says, how about if you build this? You've got 1,200 acres of land, we make it out of rocks, it'll be cheap to build, and you'll have a hotel. And a Grove agreed. And as you can see, the final result as it looked in 1913 looked very much like Fred Seeley's sketch. Fred Seeley, I should point out, was not an architect. He was a pharmacist. He took no training in architecture. He'd never built anything in his life, but he came up with this sketch. I suspect he plagiarized most of it from some of the other plans, which mysteriously nearly all disappeared. As if Fred didn't want anybody to know that maybe he didn't come up with all these ideas. But at this time, though, the two men, that being E.W. Grove supplying the money and Fred Seeley supplying the design and the management skills, started building the Grove Park Inn on July 1st of 1912. Fred Seeley announced at the groundbreaking that he was going to build this 150-room hotel in 1 year. And everybody laughed, including his father-in-law, who basically said, what's the hurry? But Fred Seeley was a driven man. And the construction photographs are wonderful. There was a photographer in town by the name of John Robinson who took wonderful photographs of the Grove Park Inn. Crawled up on the roof, on the scaffolding, and sometimes you'll see Robinson written in the bottom right-hand corner of some of his pictures. And so what happened was E.W. Grove went back to St. Louis, and Eddie really takes Fred's place running the Paris Medicine Company. So we have the Paris Medicine Company with E.W. and Eddie in St. Louis, and we have Fred and Evelyn and the kids in Asheville building the Grove Park Inn. And it's amazing. I never fail to be amazed at how they built this. Not just that they built it in a year, but look at the ramps on the left. I mean, we don't see forklifts. You don't see cranes. It was built with mules and wheelbarrows and 400 laborers. Went up into the mountain, drug those rocks down, and started building the Grove Park Inn. Stonemasons, some of them were left over from working for George Vanderbilt and on his projects, beginning, of course, with the house on the estate. So there was no shortage of qualified labor at this time. And one of the things one of the myths that Fred Seeley let out there was that he was the architect. He listed himself as the architect for the Grove Park Inn. Well, you've all been inside the Grove Park Inn. You know you cannot build that building without some training as an architect. Well, come to find out, Fred had taken that original sketch, and I suspect that stack of plans that he got from his father-in-law, to an itinerant alcoholic architect in Atlanta by the name of McKibben. And when you look on and I think the library has some of the original plans, you'll see McKibben's name down at the bottom as the architect for the Grove Park Inn. Fred Seeley was the idea man, but McKibben was the guy that came in and figured out how big the columns needed to be, how much concrete it was going to take to cover the roof, and how you were going to keep it all from falling down Sunset Mountain. Fred Seeley missed his deadline by about 12 days. And I got to show real quickly here. See the bottom, Robinson's name in the bottom? This is the Great Hall on April the 12th. April, May, June, July. 90 days later, it looked like this. 90 days later. I mean, it was amazing. They had to be working late at night getting it all done. Fred Seeley, when it was done, he selected all the furnishings for the Grove Park Inn. Again, E.W. Grove is back in St. Louis sending checks reluctantly with a lot of complaining about how much money Fred was spending. The wicker furniture all came from the Haywood Wakefield Company in Boston. The lighting fixtures came from the Roycrofters in East Aurora. And just that black streak right in the front there is actually a grandfather clock that is still in the Grove Park Inn, still right now in front of that particular column. Has been there ever since 1913. Original rooms were done in the arts and crafts style. This is 1913, and Fred Seeley was a customer and fan of the Roycrofters. The Roycrofters weren't able to meet his deadline. I mean, look at the amount of furniture. They're like 9, and everything in twin beds. We weren't to the point yet where husband and wives could sleep in the same bed, at least until after they closed the door and turned the lights off. There's like 9 pieces of furniture in each room, times 150 rooms. The Roycrofters just couldn't do it. And so the White Furniture Company down the road in Mebane, North Carolina, furnished, based on Roycroft designs, all the furniture for the Grove Park Inn's rooms, much of which is still there, still being used today. The Roycrofters, though, did provide the furniture for the dining room. And these are the famous GPI chairs that you will see pop up still on occasion. There were 400 of them originally. And so when they had to choose between doing the public rooms or doing the private rooms, the Roycrofters chose to do the public rooms. And this is where, on the night of July 12, 1913, they held the opening banquet. And this is where William Jennings Bryan was the keynote speaker. E.W. Grove was there, Fred Seeley, the governor of Tennessee, a couple senators. And it was a stag event. I still have not figured out in the newspaper reports what they did with all the wives. And I guess, you know, they sent them off probably on a tour of the hotel, but there were no women allowed in the room, and this went till 2 o'clock in the morning, but ended up with them drinking brandy and smoking cigars, and having a good time.
What room was that?
That is no longer there. That is offices now. That is when you walk into the Grove Park Inn, to your right through double doors that now go into offices is where the plantation dining room that was there until 1988. I actually had the opportunity to eat there. But when the inn built the Vanderbilt wing, it blocked the view. What we can't see is back there along that wall are windows looking down over the golf course. Those are now display cases because when they hooked the Vanderbilt wing onto it, there was no view from the dining room, hence they built a new dining room out on the end of the Vanderbilt wing and turned this into offices. So the room is still there, but you wouldn't recognize it. Fred Seeley, you know, had to occupy himself somehow, so he decided to build a castle. This is Seeley's Castle, also known as Overlook Castle. The only place you can see it from is on I-240 as you're coming into Asheville. Not so much this time of year because the trees are growing up, but it's still sitting up there looking much like this. This is how it looked in 1917. E.W. Grove wanted to keep Fred and Evelyn, more Evelyn than Fred, but wanted to keep Evelyn in town, so he gave Fred Seeley and Evelyn the top of Sunset Mountain on which to build Seeley's Castle. So this is what Fred did. But Fred could not let go of the Grove Park Inn. They actually hired a general manager after it opened in 1913, and Fred quickly ran him out of town. And so in 1914, Fred went to E.W. Grove and said, "I'll lease the hotel from you." And as I said, Grove knew nothing about hotel business, so he was glad to let Fred take over the lease, at least at the beginning, because he and Eddie Jr. were back in St. Louis just making money by the buckets, still selling tasteless chill tonic. And so Fred Seeley started running it, and he ran it like it was his own. Wonderful picture here showing you the size of the fireplaces and the two ladies there in front of the fireplace. And again, take a look at those boulders and think about what it took to get those boulders up into place. A remarkable achievement by the builders. And it was Fred Seeley's idea to put the elevator inside the fireplace. Not because he was anxious to get into Ripley's Believe It or Not, which it did eventually, but because as someone who traveled a lot and stayed in hotels, he got tired of hearing elevators. And if you think elevators are loud today, back then it was a major complaint with how loud elevators were. So Fred's solution was put them inside the fireplaces, where they still are, still operate, still work today. So sometime when you go, the stairway to the left is not there anymore. It's been moved around the corner, but that would be the stairway to take you up to the Palm Court. Fred Seeley wanted to have a swimming pool. So there was originally a swimming pool in the basement of the Grove Park Inn. But if you have any experience with swimming pools on the side of a mountain, you know that, and the Grove Park Inn can attest to this, having, I think we're on our third up there now. You build a swimming pool on the side of a mountain, and generally about the time you get it filled up, it starts to leak. Because the mountain is always moving. There's no doubt about that. So this was the original pool. So when you did come to the Grove Park Inn, you could swim in the pool, you could bowl. There was a bowling alley downstairs as well. Both of those are now gone, as it happens to be, fortunately or unfortunately. And the inn was Fred Seeley's pride and joy. I mean, it was his sixth child. And he ran it, like I said, as a strict disciplinarian. And he was sending checks back to E.W. Grove. So things are just going along swimmingly. But then things start happening. The crack starts to develop. You might notice, you might recognize, see if we can recognize a few people. This guy, you're going to know his name, but probably not his face. That's Harvey Firestone. This smug young man is going to inherit all his dad's money. This is Harvey Firestone Jr. This man you surely know, Thomas Edison. We're going to skip him for a moment. This is Henry Ford, and this is Fred Seeley. This picture ran on the front page of the New York Post. And this was not unusual. This actually was taken in 1918. And in a lot of literature, including probably some of my own in the early times, we credited this, we labeled this person as E.W. Grove. But it's not. This was actually the editor of the New York Post who was in Asheville to meet these guys who were on a camping trip. Edison's 88 years old and deaf, and why he went on a camping trip with Henry Ford, who was a maniac, is beyond me. But their last night of camping, they stayed at the Grove Park Inn, so these guys weren't roughing it too bad. And this is not, and you will see this person misidentified as E.W. Grove, and I'm going to show you, well, we'll jump ahead one. Look how E.W. Grove dresses. Tie, vest, nice suit, watch fob, very elegant. I'm sorry, but this newspaper reporter, he's a little frumpy for E.W. Grove's style, but he's got a face that could pass for it, doesn't he? So what happened is Fred Seeley had this policy. When he invited the rich and the famous, celebrities, Wiley Post, Eleanor Roosevelt eventually, he was friends of presidents. And one reason why they kept coming back was he never charged them. They got to stay for free. Because Fred was smart. He knew that where celebrities and politicians went, who followed them? CNN and Fox News. He was going to get all the publicity out of it, which he did. Millions of dollars of publicity. But Fred's on the front page. Fred's having his picture taken with presidents and secretaries of state. And back in St. Louis, this is kind of starting to irk the old man. He's getting upset about this. And so, like I said, this is when the troubles begin. And to make things worse, you got Eddie, who, keep in mind, hates Fred Seeley. Hates him. And so, even though I'm going to say Grove is as much at fault, Eddie is throwing fuel on the fire because they want to figure out how they can get him out of the Grove Park Inn. And so, 1918 is when the squabbling really starts to accelerate. And Fred Seeley realizes at that time he needs a parachute. I think he senses that his time at the Grove Park Inn, one way or the other, is going to come to an end. And so he buys Biltmore Industries from Edith Vanderbilt in 1917 and moves it next door to the Grove Park Inn, builds these 5 wonderful arts and crafts buildings, and moves the weavers of the homespun cloth and the wood carvers, he moves them across the road there. This is sort of his second business. And he's doing this at the same time that he's still running the Grove Park Inn. But he just wanted to make sure, I think, that should things go bad, and they go terribly bad, at least he was going to have something else to go. One of the big issues they came up against was Fred Seeley always thought his plan was flawed because he always felt he should have had one more wing on the right-hand side. It's out of balance. So he went to Grove in 1918 and wanted to have a new wing built on. And Grove just flatly refused. Said, no, not going to do it. If you look at some of the postcards, you will see some postcards with a wing added. Fred Seeley took scissors and cut out a wing and pasted it on there. He was so convinced that they were going to have a new wing, he started advertising it. See, even some of the souvenir plates show what I call the ghost wing on it. That was never built because you wouldn't get E.W. Grove was not going to give Fred the satisfaction that he was so successful that they needed, more. They needed more rooms. Grove then makes matters worse. Like I said, he's got a lease with Fred Seeley that says he can't compete with Fred. What's he do in 1920? He goes down the street and he buys the Manor Inn. Now the Rowell family who owned it, they were getting ready to be big investors in Biltmore Forest. They needed to raise some cash. So they sell the manor and all the cottages to E.W. Grove, which is in direct violation with his lease with Fred Seeley because it competes with the Grove Park Inn. And Fred Seeley started complaining. Well, as a result, what does E.W. Grove do next? He buys the Battery Park Hotel. Then, just to make sure that everybody in town hated him, he announced he was going to tear it down. Now, you have to understand, this is where you held wedding receptions. This is where you held family reunions. This was the downtown hub of Asheville. This is where you went to prom. Everything took place here. And E.W. Grove announces he's going to tear it down. And in its place, he's going to build a modern hotel. Then, what we now call the Battery Park Hotel. This is the new Battery Park Hotel. And up on the very top, this is E.W. Grove's penthouse suite, where eventually he dies. So, yeah, things happen. But he built this downtown. It's got better views than the Grove Park Inn. It's cheaper rates than the Grove Park Inn. And this is just continuing to infuriate Fred Seeley. Then Fred Seeley takes the unprecedented step of suing his father-in-law. And here it gets a little complicated, so you gotta go with me on this one. As the headline says, $5 million will suit against man still living. Here's the crux of it. Fred Seeley claimed that in 1900, 2 years after he met E.W. Grove, that they sat down in a room with their lawyers, George Williams, and E.W. Grove drew up a will. And as part of that will, he said that upon his death, Fred Seeley would have his choice of either owning, and the key word there is owning, the Paris Medicine Company, this is 1900, keep in mind, or all the rest of E.W. Grove's holdings. And E.W. Grove invested in real estate in Atlanta, Asheville, and so that was the crux of it. Well, in 1925, E.W. Grove publicly announces that he is tearing, or that will is, he doesn't say tearing up, he writes a new will. And under the terms of the new will, now we're in 1925, 25 years after 1900, he now has 1,100 acres of land. He has the Grove Park Inn. He has a couple of subdivisions in Asheville. He's got a cattle ranch in Texas. He's got timberland in Arkansas. He's even got land in Mexico. $10 million worth, a lot of money. And he announces that under his new will, number one, when he dies, nothing will be sold. Number two, everything will be put into a trust. And number three, the income from the trust will be divided up into thirds. 1/3 to his wife Gertrude, 1/3 to his son Eddie, and 1/3 to his daughter Evelyn. And also during this time, I should point out that E.W. Grove, and from a historian's point of view, this is wonderful. The man was deaf. He couldn't talk on the telephone, so he writes letters. Letters to friends, letters to everybody. His collection of letters would fill the stage. And in his letters to Evelyn, he is just going on and on and on about how much money he's making, how much money he's leaving for her and the grandchildren, trying to literally drive this wedge between he and Fred Seeley. Because I think at the heart of it, and I've seen pictures of his first wife, Evelyn, their daughter, looks just like her. Just like her. And I'm sure that in his mind, Gertrude was there because he had to be married to somebody. He was always in love with his first wife, and hence in his daughter, Evelyn. And the letters to him are very affectionate and flowing, and Fred Seeley is just going crazy, just driving him nuts. And he's saying to the old man, you can't do this. You're driving a wedge between me and my wife. And he would just say, I'm just telling her how I'm doing. No big deal. So Fred is upset as it is for many reasons. The violation of the lease, the announcement of the changing of the will, and in the new will, Fred Seeley's name never appears. He gets nothing directly. Now, of course, indirectly, a rational person would say, well, geez, you're going to get the income from 1/3 of the estate is going to go to your wife. You can sell Biltmore Industries, you can tour the world, but that wasn't good enough for Fred Seeley. His pride was hurt because he still believed that upon the death, he was supposed to get his choice of either the Paris Medicine Company or his other holdings, which really was going to be the Grove Park Inn. That's what Fred wanted. He wanted ownership of the Grove Park Inn. So he sues his father-in-law and says, and meanwhile, the Grove Park Inn is just chugging along. It's a cash cow in the 20s. It's making money hand over fist. And that's making Eddie Jr. want to get Fred out all that much more. It really does, And so during that year, depositions are being taken, and these two guys are back in St. Louis, really plotting on, how they're going to get rid of Fred. And so the lawsuit is progressing along. Hasn't gone to court yet, but what really messes things up is that in January of 1927, E.W., who's 77 years old, and to put his age into perspective, Fred Seeley, who was we call him a health nut today. I mean, he advocated eating prunes once a day. Every day at the Grove Park Inn, if you look on the menus, prunes are there every day. He was into organic food and exercise before anybody else was at that time period. Fred Seeley, nevertheless, dies at age 71. Not an untypical age for someone born in the Victorian era. This man's born 10 years before the Civil War. In 1927, at age 77, he's still kicking butt and taking names. And so what's he do in 1920? In January, he starts losing it. He runs off with his nurse from St. Petersburg. And as much as sad, you can imagine that any way you want to. Eddie hires a detective, and he finds him in a hotel in Baltimore. And so he sends he sends people up there to get him. And so E.W. gets mad, and E.W. brings this nurse to Asheville, and they check into the penthouse suite of the Battery Park Hotel. And yet Eddie keeps this detective on hand because they're trying to figure out, number one, is she really his nurse, or is she his mistress, or what's going on here? And then Fred Seeley is hiring detectives. The Pinkerton detective file is about 3 inches thick because they're all got detectives following each other around. So then one night, January 27th, E.W. Grove dies. And boy, the rumors start flying. One of them was that Eddie had him poisoned. Another one was that he'd gone down to this is the one. Depending on which history tour in Asheville you take, you get a different story. You may get the one he was poisoned by Eddie. You may get the one in the middle of the night he went down to the kitchen and he ate bad oysters and died of eating bad oysters. But the bottom line is, when you see his death certificate, he died of pneumonia. Not all that unusual for someone 77 years old. But so this really throws the whole trial thing into a mess. And there were some more delays then, of course. And so he dies in January 1927. February, they officially read the will. And it was as I outlined before. Everything goes into a trust. But the surprise was Eddie Jr. is the executor. Oh. Not the attorney, not some trust executor. Eddie is the executor of the estate. And so maybe he did have reason to poison the oysters. And so the trial goes on. The trial opens up in December. And this is big headlines because this is unprecedented where you have this suit. Now you've got, Fred Seeley suing his dead father-in-law. That even makes a better story than when he's alive. But in effect, he's suing the estate. And obviously, there's only 3 people who can testify. There's Fred Seeley. Well, theoretically, 3 people. There would have been Fred Seeley, E.W. Grove, who's now dead, and George Williams, the attorney. They were the only 3 men in the room on the day in 1900 when the will was made out that, according to Fred Seeley, so it was Fred Seeley's word against the dead man's word. And so they put Fred Seeley on the stand, and they kept him there for 5 days. His own attorneys first building up how much Fred Seeley had done, to make the Paris Medicine Company great. It was Fred Seeley who designed the pig ad, with the baby and the pig and no cure, no pay. That's all Fred Seeley. But then when the estate's lawyers get a hold of him, they really tear into him. And they try to get him to explain how it could be that after only working for E.W. Grove for 2 years, from 1898, actually 1 year, 1899 to 1900, why would E.W. Grove give him half of his entire estate? It just didn't make sense. And they grilled him, they grilled him, they grilled him. But Fred stuck to his guns. He said, I saw the document, but when they said, do you have a copy? No. He said, I was always told that it was destroyed, but it was a legal binding contract. And so this goes on, like I say, for a couple of days here. On and on and on. Newspapers are eating it up. And again, my thanks to the North Carolina room, because I learned all this sitting in there, going half blind, reading microfilm about all this. But it's wonderful stuff. It was a drama being played out. But after they got done with Fred Seeley, they put the attorney, George Williams, who at that time was Senator Williams of Missouri. So another big headline. The senators up there asked to remember one transaction 28 years earlier, and he pretty much recites Fred Seeley's story. And, you know, who knows? They were friends, whether or not, and well, I don't know whether he was in the courtroom or not, but basically he sits there and says, yes, I drew up the will. They asked him if he had a copy of it. He said no. You know, when he went into politics, his files got dumped and, you know, fire, a flood, whatever. No, he didn't have a copy of it either, but he distinctly remembered that in this document, E.W. Grove promised Fred Seeley either the Paris Medicine Company or all of his other holdings. And he remembered. So lo and behold, they go back to their table and they got a copy of the will. Eddie had it the whole time. The whole time. And they have Williams, you know, it says here, original will does not mention him as a beneficiary. Man who drew it is bowled over, courtroom breathless, when ancient document turns up. This is Fox News, isn't it? They made Williams read the will. And Fred Seeley was pretty close. But there was a tiny bit of difference in his memory and what was actually written down. Upon E.W. Grove's death, Fred Seeley was given the choice of managing the Paris Medicine Company or the other holdings. It said nothing about ownership. Fred Seeley is publicly humiliated. This has been headlines. And now, I mean, and George Williams looks like a liar. And Fred Seeley looks like he had maybe a lapse of memory, or maybe he knew he was lying, but he was wrong. Gavel goes down, suit's dismissed, the place is in an uproar. Fred Seeley's lawyers are really mad because everybody assumed there was no will left, and so it was going to be, in one sense, Seeley's word against a dead man's word, and they thought he had a pretty good chance of winning. And so the question always was, Eddie could have prevented the whole lawsuit, the whole trial from taking place. When Fred first announced it, all he had to do was say, hey, I got it. It doesn't say here anything about you owning it. But he sat on it. He sat on it. He paid lawyers to be in that courtroom for 5 days grilling Fred Seeley, and then he pulls out the ace of spades. Boom. Just so he could humiliate him. Just so he could get his revenge on Fred Seeley. But, speaking of revenge. So the postscript, you know, the Paul Harvey, now the rest of the story. So, Fred Seeley is booted out of the Grove Park Inn. Eddie is executor of the estate. But remember, under the new will, which the court recognized, everything is thrown into a trust, income divided 3 ways. Well, on the way home from the courthouse, you know, E.W.'s dead, buried in Paris, Tennessee, amazingly. Show you my theory about being in love with his first wife. In the Paris, Tennessee cemetery, here's E.W. Grove's grave. Next to it is his first wife. And when Gertrude dies, she's buried on the other side. So he carried the torch for Mary Louise his whole life. All right, but Gertrude, on the way home from the courthouse, and the irony is, Gertrude by this time was deaf as well. So during the trial, when Fred Seeley is on the stand, Gertrude's sitting on a chair right here, listening to him the whole time. She's up there, and then Eddie's in there as well, because he's hurting her out. On the way home, she says to Eddie, you know, I'd like to have my third in cash. Well, there's an obscure law called a widow's dower, where if a widow can prove to the executor that she's in a hardship, that he can change the terms of the will. So on the way home, they decide, yeah, no problem, we'll sell the Grove Park Inn. which Eddie did. Sold the Grove Park Inn in 1929. The sale took place in 29, but basically 1/3 of the $10 million was liquidated and put into Gertrude's bank account. 6 months later, she's at home and she dies. The only person with her, Eddie. The only one with her. She dies. Suddenly, Eddie's treating the trust. Oh, we got Eddie. Where's Eddie? We gotta get Eddie back up here. Eddie's treating the trust like a personal bank account. He's selling things right and left. And when he isn't selling, he's buying. He's buying fast cars, fast boats, fast women. He has two paternity suits filed against him. One woman that he had bought a house for claimed that she promised to marry him and didn't let her know that he was married with children. He was a scumbag, no doubt about it. He was just as low as they go. And so, you know, you gotta believe, sometimes justice does prevail. 1934, Eddie dies of syphilis.
Oh my God.
I'm told it was a slow and painful death.
That's great.
Isn't that great? Well, listen, the ironies don't stop there. By the time that Eddie Jr. dies, there isn't much left of the trust. They've been running through it, and the split between the Seeleys and the Groves continued on into the future. And I'll tie that up here in just 30 seconds. But so in the 30s, and you know what he didn't wreck of the trust, the Depression did. You know, land prices plummeted. The Grove Park Inn went bankrupt a couple times. They sold it at the top of the market before the crash. So they got big money for the Grove Park Inn to the group of bankers and investors in Baltimore. And the Grove Park Inn struggled all through the 30s, but that wasn't his, you know, he got the money, no problem there. In the 30s, they decide, you know, this is worthless. Evelyn is still getting money, and I will say this, she lived comfortably her whole life. She always got money from the trust. But in the 30s, they all decided that they needed to divvy up what was left. Well, one of the things that was left was the new Battery Park Hotel. One of the things that caused the split ends up being owned by Evelyn Grove Seeley. They owned the Battery Park Hotel. And her youngest son was around. He came out of the Navy and came back, and they decided that they needed to sell. They didn't know anything about the hotel business. And so who would come to Asheville looking to buy the Battery Park Hotel? Charles Sammons. Comes to town, takes one look at the Battery Park Hotel and says, nah, not interested. Drives up the road to the Grove Park Inn. I'll buy it. 1955, Charles Sammons buys the Grove Park Inn for a song, but it was pretty bad shape at the time. And he and his wife, Elaine, run the Grove Park Inn for, you know, half a century. And are really largely responsible for, you know, for its future. As far as Evelyn, relations between her and Fred were never the same. As I said, they had 4 older children, and then they had a late one. Fred Jr. was born in 1915. And so he was a teenager at the time of the lawsuit, 12 years old. He said his mother did not speak to her husband for over a year. She was so mad at him for suing her father over the will business. She said, you know, her attitude was, we're going to get money every year, we have nothing to worry about, why are you stirring things up? Fred's pride was not going to let that happen. You know, he had too much pride to do that. So their marriage was never the same. There's no doubt about that. They lived, you know, like I say, the lawsuit ended in 28. They lived comfortably through the Depression. Fred Seeley, I think, to his credit, even though he doesn't get really enough credit other than books and a few talks like this up at the Grove Park Inn, but to his credit, he built more industries going all through the Depression, employing, you know, 40, 50 people at a time when other textile mills were going out of business. He was that good of a manager that he could do things. But he was also sneaky in some ways too. Back to his castle, Asheville at the time he was building the castle had this rule that said you didn't start paying property taxes until your house was finished. Well, you got a 30,000 square foot house. He left one wing unfinished and never paid property taxes until finally they got smart and changed the law and made him start paying property taxes. So Fred, you know, I'm not going to ever say he broke the law, but he sure could find his way around certain regulations. And he could write. He was a manager. He could manage anything. And so, to his credit, he keeps Biltmore Industries going. He dies in Seeley's Castle, 1941, and dies there at age 71. Evelyn lives on for another 10 years or so before she passes away. And Seeley's Castle never opened to the public, privately owned. I've tried many times to get it open to the public during the Arts and Crafts Conference. It's a fundraiser, and they keep putting me off. The roof's always leaking. You got a 30,000 square foot flat roof, it's always leaking. They're always waiting. It's never quite done. So, but like I said, you love history, you love ironies. Last slide. And again, even though he had his faults, I do consider Fred Seeley to be sort of the hero of this story. And he doesn't get probably enough credit. But and when I think about all the things that E.W. Grove invested his money in, there's nothing in St. Petersburg left, nothing in St. Louis. I found his house one day. It's an apartment, a little duplex or a house, a nice house, but he didn't leave anything lasting in St. Louis. I tried to find the factory. It's been torn down. Paris, he provided the money for the local high school. It's closed up now. They consolidated there. Really, the only two things, the Paris Medicine Company got bought up by Bristol Myers in the 50s, and so it doesn't exist anymore. And so, really what's left of E.W. Grove's legacy is the, you could call it the unfinished Grove Arcade, which he was building at the time, the new Battery Park Hotel, and you're entitled to your own opinion of it in terms of architecture, and the Grove Park Inn. And the two men, and we can only stop and think about what if they had gotten along? What else they could have done together instead of running that wonderful Grove fortune in the ground and splitting the two families. And I'll end with a story about the two families. The Seeleys and the Groves, over the years, always, I was in touch with both sides as I was doing the research for the Built for the Ages book. They always believed that the other family got all the money and didn't talk to each other, made no attempt through the years to ever have any connection or conversation with each other. Until finally it got to far enough down the generation that one of them said, probably two of them said, this is ridiculous. We need to get together. And so they arranged a meeting at the Grove Park Inn, of course, and they asked if I would come and tell the story of what happened. And it was funny because each of them pulled me aside privately, and they wanted to know, where was the money? Where's the money? Everybody wanted to know. And I think I finally convinced them that, it was between Eddie and the Great Depression, that pretty much was the end of the fortune that E.W. Grove had worked so hard to build up. But we are so fortunate here in Asheville to have as one of the, the cornerstones of our city and of our attraction to the rest of the world, being what, I call, we got the two bookends. We got the Biltmore House at one end, the finest example of late Victorian architecture and interior design you'll find anywhere, and then you got the finest example of an arts and crafts resort hotel you'll find anywhere. We've got these two wonderful bookends and all this funky stuff going on in between. So, thank you very much. I'll record it. We got to go.